Welcome to Brash Ag, the farm innovation podcast with hosts Raymond King and Kit Franklin. Supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust, advancing knowledge, understanding, practice and competence in the application of engineering and technology to achieve sustainable agriculture.
How you doing, Ray?
Yeah, very good indeed.
So we've just come out of the iAgri's 2024 conference. The conference theme was looking at what agricultural engineers can do for the ag industry, but also the wider supply chain. So we had representatives across the supply chain, and they were asked to basically put forward the things they need solutions to. We as engineers need to consider solving those solutions. So an engineering conference where none of the speakers were engineers.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a first actually for me, having attended a few different conferences and as an engineer, and I think it's great actually to I think it's a temptation as an engineer to get stuck into the detail, get stuck into the technical and kind of bury your head in the data and the numbers and that side of things. But actually having some time to talk to the people that are either upstream or downstream of where you sit as an engineer in the supply chain is a really, really good idea. So yeah.
Well, I think as Mark Moore, the iAgri's president, said right at the start, and he finished it up with the same statement, it's very easy to work in silos and we need to work across sectors. The world's big problems that are coming down the track are never going to be solved in silos. They're going to be solved by working together. And then I think there was an element of almost an opportunity for us to remind those industry leaders that we got as speakers, to remind them that we as ag engineers exist. Because I wouldn't like to say, but I guess some of them probably don't think about ag engineers very often. So hopefully they've gone away from here as the speakers going, we should bring ag engineers to the table more often.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think it, again, it's probably perhaps slight nature of engineers to kind of get stuck into the backroom work and sort of stick themselves in the back room. And actually, I think inviting the people that were invited to the conference actually brings everyone into the forefront. He brings engineers into the forefront of people's minds, and as you say, they're going to, the delegates hopefully will, or the speakers, sorry, should I say, will go back to their organisations and say, well, actually, you had a really fruitful and interesting, delivered a presentation and actually had some fruitful discussions and got some really good thoughts and did some good networking as well. So hopefully that will. You're probably hard to measure, but hopefully we'll see the fruits of that sort of come to bear.
And we are literally recording this straight after the conference. I've just watched most of the people leave in front of the window in front of us. We're sat at Rothamsted Research, which is where the conference was held. We're sat in front of a sort of mural on the wall that depicts some of the research that's gone on at Rothamsted for now nearly 200 years, around 180 years. There has been a long-term crop trial here. My understanding is it's the oldest crop trial in the world and still adds value to the industry today. So what better place to sit and consider the future than somewhere that has been sort of creating the future and creating science for such a long time?
No, I think it'd be worthwhile perhaps going through some of our thoughts about each of the speakers and what they had to say for themselves. The conference was opened by Mark Moore, who's the president of iAgri at the moment. So I think that one of the takeaways for me was the FAO predicts that we're going to need to produce 60% more food by 2060. I think I've heard lots of different figures and facts along the way for things like that, but I think that was a big takeaway for me. And actually, as an engineer, I can already see some of the challenges, I suppose, having been involved in the industry for a while, so I can kind of see that. But it was kind of brought it into the forefront of my mind, perhaps.
Yeah, and the other thing he said, I've already mentioned, he said about the silo situation, but also the other thing he said that people need to be able to extract money and value at every stage. And that's quite a sort of almost an outspoken view, and almost seems shocking sometimes to hear that. Like, but ultimately, no one is producing food. No one in the food chain is operating as a charity, or I suppose there probably are charities in the food chain nowadays. But really, we're all businesses, be it engineers, farmers, food processing companies, marketing companies. We all need to extract some value for what we put in. None more so importantly than farming, and we all know that farming is always being squeezed, as we probably talked about in our last podcast.
Yes, yeah, and I think, as you said, I mean, we're kind of gone around this one already, but I took away from it as well. Ag engineers aren't always sat around the table when it comes to discussions at kind of all levels, company levels, within organisations, and also at the sort of government and policy discussion level. And I think that was interesting to hear that from Mark, and actually kind of puts, gives us, it kind of brings things to the front. Like, we need to put ourselves in a position where we are having those conversations and people are involving agricultural engineers in the discussions around agriculture and food production.
Yeah, and I think, to be fair, we should nod to what Mark's role at AGCO is, where he is the, I'm not sure exact job title without looking it up, but it's essentially he leads government liaison for AGCO here in Europe. I think it's a European role, leading that sort of government relations, Europe and UK.
Mm-hmm.
So hopefully he's in a good place to fight that corner for us.
Yes,
certainly. And hopefully he's not just fighting the corner on behalf of AGCO, but he's fighting on behalf of our whole industry. Okay, so our first speaker proper, as it were, was Kate, and she came from the Food and Drink Federation. Where she's a lead scientist,
chief scientific officer.
Yeah. Right,
yeah. She had a really good quote. I've heard it before, but I liked it, and it set the scene well for the rest of her discussion, which was, if you want to go fast, travel alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And I think, as Kate mentioned, that's been quoted to various different people, organisations, groups.
And obviously these days it's a classic sort of internet self-help meme, isn't
it?
Yeah. So, but highlighting that importance of getting out of our silos, talking across boundaries, to make big change. Interestingly, I'm going to sort of jump ahead. One thing she did mention is she goes, an example where maybe, because I guess the inference of that statement is that you're better off to work together.
Mm-hmm.
But she said, obviously where maybe here in the UK, maybe we can be faster and independent is in that sort of space of where we can look towards genetics and crop breeding and things like that. And now we're outside of the EU. Now, if that ever really comes to pass, there is some sort of early legislation to lead the way down that sort of path. But who knows, we're under a new administration in government and that could all change. But there is an opportunity where we could maybe stride ahead and make a difference because of our independence.
Yes, that was a really good point, actually. Yeah, we jumped ahead a little bit there, but actually I think it's a really good point. Yeah, if you now that the UK is outside of the EU, we can either view it as a threat or an opportunity. And actually, I think if we want to go it alone, we can go fast and we can go in a new direction potentially. As you say, genetically modified crops or new technologies and approaches that perhaps are going to take longer to be fostered within the EU. We could potentially even be trailblazers. Perhaps we go it alone and then the EU follow us. That would be an interesting way for things to play out. So I thought that was a good takeaway. I thought actually interesting kind of fact as well. So food manufacturing is the largest manufacturing sector in the UK.
Yeah, I'm always intrigued by that stat. I've heard that stat boxed in many ways before. I don't doubt it, but sometimes people are including the whole supply chain in that. So sometimes people will be including farmers in that. They will be including, engineers or, your ag technicians who are out in vans. That whole thing from field to fork, and everyone who touches it on the way, sometimes they're wrapped up in that number. But I think even if you just pull out the literal food sector, the people who add value to farm products is still, I think, potentially that same figure still stands. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah, I don't know. We didn't get a full breakdown on that one, to be honest, but I think it just kind of gave me pause for thought. Actually, I think we, as a country, we like to think of ourselves as a manufacturing power, albeit a fairly small country, but actually that, you know, we do have manufacturing capability, and I think as engineers we probably take some of that for granted, but I'd never thought of it in the context of manufacturing food.
On the flip side of that, though, she also highlighted the fact that there's huge labour shortages. So there's this massive employment base, but one that was suffering greater unemployment than most others. In terms of open job roles. I think that from memory, the graph, I didn't take exact notes. You might have done, Ray, of this number, but I think she was sort of saying that generally UK industry was suffering sort of 2.5% to 3% sort of vacancy rate, whereas the food industry had a vacancy rate of more like 4.5%, 5%. So like a good percentage point above the rest of the country. So huge opportunity for jobs. Maybe some of those jobs aren't, you know, the most appealing. I suspect a lot of it's factory work and line work and that sort of thing. But there are jobs there. But then maybe as engineers, she didn't highlight this as something that is an opportunity for engineers, but we maybe can read into that and go, well, if there's a 5% vacancy rate, some of those jobs are really menial. Some of them are very much automatable. That's somewhere that we should be going as engineers.
Yeah, I think I was going to add to that, actually. Yeah, I think it comes back to your favourite quote of dull, dirty and dangerous. And then probably some of those roles tick all of those boxes. So they're sort of, from that perspective, they're primed for automation and the application of new technologies or existing technologies in a different way. So I think that was interesting. I think also another fact that she pulled up was a third of food produced is wasted. And I think actually there's potentially some quite interesting opportunities there, thinking about kind of start to finish, or, you know, end to end of the food system, and where food kind of gets, where the waste exists, and then also where perhaps it could be minimized. Again, thinking about potentially, or it kind of takes me immediately to sort of in-field harvesting and perhaps precision harvesting, things like that, to try and pull produce from a field at the right point, so you're sort of maximizing its time in the field until such time as you need it. You're not having to reject it at the factory or leave it to rot in the field.
Yeah, I think some things are left to rot in the field because the day that they're being harvested, I think we talked about this again before, but you know, if you go into a field of lettuces, there'll be, you know, there could be a quarter of those lettuces that aren't ready for harvest. There could be a quarter that have gone too far to harvest, and you're going to end up wasting half of your lettuces in your field. So there's work to be done there. I'm going to jump to linking through to another talk with just while we were touching on the labour thing and talking about some of those vacancies. And Jake from Waitrose, he spoke, we'll go into what Jake said later, but he mentioned about the fact that, you know, worker welfare is a really big thing in the food chain, and stated that, you know, agriculture and the food chain is one of the greatest areas of modern slavery issues. So again, that's something that we should all be aware of and should be shining a light on, in terms of what are those practices that are unethical. How can technology or engineering, how can they help some of those roles that maybe are being done in unethical ways, because not trying to make excuses, but I guess there's probably pressures to get certain things done for certain amounts of money, which then means that people start to turn a blind eye to the sort of practices that are going on. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying. You're basically saying, yeah, that the types of roles perhaps that are subject to that. I mean, he kind of made a comment around that, and he says agriculture, car washes, and nail bars are some of the worst places for modern slavery, and that if you don't know where it is within a supply chain, then you just haven't looked hard enough. not only from an automation perspective, but also from a traceability perspective. If there's ways in which even potentially types of jobs that are being done can be logged and tracked and understood, I think traceability is a common theme. I think we will come back to this when we kind of talk at the end. But I think there's potentially opportunities there as well, and for engineers to actually facilitate traceability, not just for actual produce, but how that produce was made and who was involved.
Yeah, so I think just to wrap up then Kate Hallowell's section, I've got 2 points that link very much together, and then we'll move on. Otherwise, we'll be here all night, Ray. Ag is the food supply chain's scope 3 emissions. So when we talk about emission scopes and the fact that scope 1 are things that you can directly control, scope 2 are things that you have influence over, and then scope 3 are things that are kind of further down the supply chain and it's a bit harder to get control over. Well, agriculture, the farm, is the scope 3 for the food chain. So the food chain is this huge employer, this huge part of the UK economy. Ag is their scope 3 emission, and therefore, they should be putting a big attention on the ag from that point of view in trying to, and I would argue, trying to help us, or trying to help engineers help farmers solve some of those problems. And that links into another point that I made note of, which one of the big take homes for me as an engineering opportunity is Kate mentioned recycling and a sort of circularity of recycling. So her example was, when are we going to get to the point where you can put a Walker's crisp packet back into a system that takes it back to Walker's so it can be washed out and refilled with crisps? And there's no actual reason why you can do that. You could easily sterilize a crisp bag. A crisp bag could easily be resealed and be used for more than one transportation of one set of crisps. And that's where her head was going in terms of how far recycling may have to go in the next 10 years, 15 years. And that's surely a huge opportunity for engineers, ag engineers, to get involved with.
Yeah, no, I had a few notes on that as well. It was interesting, actually, that Kate mentioned that where actually the UK is behind the USA and the EU with regards to recycling and, well, I suppose what actually is reuse, isn't it? It's reusing existing stuff. Reusing existing packaging is better than recycling it because of the energy involved to make the packaging the first time round. So yeah, I think there's lots of opportunities there for engineers to apply, to kind of draw lower level problems from that and then start to try and solve them.
So we often talk about technologies trying to find a solution. That is a problem that needs solving. So go and find some tech to solve it. That's the right way around. That's the way we should be going about things.
Yeah. I got one final point, actually. It was just interesting. I think it was perhaps a little less easy to put a fine point on it, but there was, Kate mentioned a lot around food manufacturing, focusing a lot on the challenges to make food healthier.
Yeah.
Again, potentially some sort of traceability aspects to that in terms of labeling and what ends up on the packaging. Perhaps a little bit harder for me, at least, to see a direct, obviously, engineers involved in the actual manufacturing of food. There's obviously opportunities and challenges or sort of problems looking for solutions there, but I think perhaps harder to put a finer point on it from my perspective, at least.
I'm sure there's places where engineering comes into it, but I kind of feel like it's outside of our scope. But maybe we just need more specific requests.
That's what I suppose that's what I was trying to say. It was I didn't feel that there was a fine point that we could either draw from it or we had pushed at us, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't think about it. Perhaps, I suppose, just to sort of think on the hoof, there could be elements of actual nutrient monitoring, measurement, information capture, traceability, as I mentioned,
protein monitoring on your combine harvester.
Yeah, things like that. I mean, that I think we'll get to the end when we do a roundup, and probably from the discussion we'll have, there'll be I took two very strong themes from everything today, which is actually great. Actually, I think that's actually really, really useful as an engineer. So, but yeah, no, I think it was hard for me to pull a really sharp point up to that. But actually, thinking about it now, perhaps there are there are pieces of technology that exist or could exist, with a bit more work or investment to actually help in that challenge in terms of making food healthier for consumers.
Okay, so let's move on. We've already been quite a long time, and we're only on speaker 1. So speaker 2, Yelty Wiersma, bound to be pronounced wrong because I've read it, but Yelty is the Secretary General of SEMA. I'm not going to try and say what the acronym SEMA means because Yelty himself said he struggled to remember it, so I think that gives me a get out clause. But basically, SEMA is the trade organization for agricultural manufacturers. So each company probably has a trade organization. Here in the UK, it's the AEA, the Agricultural Engineers Association. So all manufacturers, or not all, but if you're an ag manufacturer, you can be a member of that group, and they will help you make sure that your machines are compliant, and they can help you lobby if you see legislation coming your direction that's not useful, or you can, that. So the AEA are doing that certainly here in the UK. Each country has an equivalent, but SEMA sort of compiles that together and essentially lobbies on a European level. So Yelty and his team are based in Brussels and are pressing the flesh with commissioners and MEPs, etc., on a daily basis. And obviously his voice, therefore, to some degree, is sort of summarizing the thoughts of a whole agricultural manufacturing industry.
Yes, yeah, it's interesting. Actually, he had some. I liked his sense of humour. I think his comments around, the UK still being involved in SEMA because, as much as we've left the EU, we haven't left Europe, and actually they represent European manufacturers rather than EU manufacturers. And I think there's a few takeaways for me. So, key challenges that he could see were data and energy, and he talked.
Yeah, just before we go into that, Ray, you're completely right. Big 2 are data and energy, but he did start with this very long rambling speech, and if the recording of the day becomes available via iAgri channels, I'd endorse you to not only watch all of it, but certainly hone in on this. Yelty gave a big sort of, I don't know, it must have been 150-word description of what agriculture can do for the world. So it's, feed people sustainably whilst capturing carbon, increasing biodiversity, all the huge list of what ag and ag-eng has to do for the world in the next 10, 15 years. And I guess his point was, if you read that or you hear him say it and it takes him a minute to say it, you realize, that's quite almost a deflating challenge because it's so big, it's unattainable. Mm-hmm. So then his thing was, well, actually, we can boil it right down to 2 things, and that's energy and data. Yeah, if we get energy right and we get data right, all of the things in that 1-minute statement or however long it was will potentially fall into place.
Yeah. No, and I think in the position that he's in, I think we can see quite clearly that energy and data are the two are really 2 kind of elements that are, they're 2 of the biggest challenges is exactly what he called them. So he also ran through some themes for farming, which were, again, can't put a fine point in them, but innovation, sustainability, and then one that I picked up on, which was freedom to farm. And I think it was interesting to hear his thoughts around SEMA. So they want farmers provide what they want to do, what they want to grow, and SEMA think of it as an engineer's role to kind of provide how. So how are we going to do that, but in a way that facilitates farmers to farm in the way that they want to farm.
Slightly wider than that, in the sense that his point was that politicians and bureaucrats in Brussels shouldn't be telling farmers what they're growing.
Yes. Yeah.
They should be making a landscape. Yeah, farmers have to comply with the regulation for the greater good, etc. But you shouldn't be telling farmers how to farm or what to farm. Mm-hmm. That should be the farmer's freedom, essentially.
Yeah.
And then we as engineers should be supporting them to do what they wish to do. So if that's grow tomatoes in the Outer Hebrides, then set us the challenge and we'll try and help you do it. Yeah, hopefully it'll be slightly more sensible than that.
Well, yeah, no, yeah, exactly that. And I think, I'm just reading through my notes here, and exactly that. Politicians should not decide what tech farmers should use, or what it is actually. It's bigger than that, even as in terms of what they should be farming or how they should be farming.
From a more specific engineering point of view, he also said, he believes that Brussels should be technology agnostic. He didn't use that word, but that's basically what he was saying, is they should be prescribing that we need to bring emissions down. They should not be prescribing it needs to be a battery car.
Yeah.
When Brussels and UK government say cars must be battery cars by the year 2030 or whatever the numbers are, that is actually outside of both of their remits, really. As a government, they should be saying what they want achieved. They are not technologists, and they should not be dictating how it's achieved.
Yeah.
And he was very passionate about that. And I'm certainly something I get on board with, because ultimately we're trying to bring emissions down. Well, maybe there's just different things we feed into our internal combustion engines that can bring emissions down but still maintain farming. And essentially his point was, if they've done it to cars and automotive, if they put those same sort of arbitrary points onto ag, it would just mess everything. It would just be impossible. You say, right, 2035, every tractor's a battery. Well, unless there's a huge battery technology breakthrough, farming just breaks down at that point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good to know he's got a strong voice in Brussels, affirming with them that their place is to set goals and targets, not to set how those things are achieved.
Yeah,
we as an industry need to be free. Not only do farmers need to be free, but we as an industry, as engineers, need to be free to solve problems to those targets. Yeah, fine, put targets in place, but let us solve them. Don't tell us spend the next 10 years developing batteries. Yeah, if that makes sense.
No, I think it was good, actually. I wrote down the example that he gave around powering tractors with fugitive methane, and kind of the technology required to deliver that. And actually his statement was kind of along the lines of you couldn't, as a politician, you couldn't predict a technology that becoming available. You have to just support it when it happens. And actually, it was collaboration between farmers and engineers that made that happen, not a diktat from any particular government or other body to say you need to go away and do this. It was it was driven by innovation that was collaboration between farmers and engineers.
Just a couple of other things that he said, and then we'll move on again. Brussels' door is currently open. He said, the farmers and their farmer process and their tractors. He said that tractor is the best lobbying tool available. Was his view. And after last winter's farm uprisings in Brussels, there has been a realignment, and the door is ajar for farmers and innovators to bring technology and get it through. He made out that he felt there had been a step change in the last year, thanks to those tractors. Maybe. But then also the question was asked of what happens with the US political scene. And he was saying, under a new US administration, if we end up in a tit-for-tat sort of trade war, we have to be really aware that the ag engineering industry, certainly the multinationals, are not just they're not multinational, really. They're trans-European, transatlantic. Our big manufacturers are American-based. They are EU-based. They all have manufacturing plants both sides of the pond. They all have development plants, development centers either side of the pond. And if we end up with a tit-for-tat trade war, that's going to hit ag manufacturers, machinery manufacturers massively.
Mm-hmm. I think, thinking about that, and he put a fine point on that, saying machinery manufacturers are transatlantic, which means that they manufacture some of their stock in America and USA, and then some of their stock gets manufactured in Europe. So it could end up being a very difficult situation to manage, where machinery just has to move across the Atlantic to find its home, and that's kind of just by virtue of where it's been manufactured, rather than necessarily sort of fulfilling any particular specific
Yeah, and
national niche.
the point that he was making is that we manufacture in small numbers. So let's just take an example. Let's take John Deere. I can speak of it. In America, they make their large frame tractors from memory is sort of 8 series up, 7 series, 8 series upwards. In Europe, they make the 6 series, but that doesn't mean the others aren't sold in the other market. But it would be unnecessary to have lines for all in both continents. That's just crazy. So they've put some lines in one continent, some lines in the other continent, and essentially a small amount of tractors swap over in the middle of the Atlantic.
Yeah.
If suddenly you need to be making everything everywhere, that's a crazy scenario.
I think fundamentally, I suppose, ultimately, farmers will pay the price, won't they? Because they'll have to pay more money for their hardware. They'll either have to pay for their imported hardware with tariffs on it, or they'll have to pay for the cost of a manufacturer to put in a new line to manufacture something. So I think also worth saying we're kind of going into a little bit of 3 or 4 steps ahead of where perhaps we are. We don't know exactly how that's going to play out.
You are listening to Brash Ag, supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust.
Okay then, so let's move on to Jake Pickering, a highly energetic, engaging speech from Jake, who is the senior agricultural manager for Waitrose, covering meat production and now also fisheries. But he said in his own words, don't ask him about fisheries yet, because he's only just picked up that job in the last couple of weeks and he's not got on top of it yet. But anyway, he gave a very energetic talk about Waitrose, their customers, what their customers want, and hopefully sort of a bit of inspiration as to how we can help influence that value attached to food. I think that was his big thing.
Yeah, he had I'm just again going through my notes. He said certainly for Waitrose, he saw it that customers want value, and that doesn't necessarily mean the cheapest produce. It just means that they want to see they want to feel that they've had value from their produce. And for Waitrose, that means traceability and more understanding about where that produce has come from.
Yeah, and the word he sort of said right at the start was reassurance. A Waitrose customer wants to be reassured that their food's going to taste good, it's good for the planet, it's been farmed by nice people in a nice environment, etc., etc., etc. And that doesn't mean cheap, but it does mean to the Waitrose customer, who is, let's just be honest, the wealthier customer. Again, if you're listening internationally, you won't necessarily know this, but Waitrose is like a premier supermarket in the UK, I guess. High-end supermarket. So the customer that shops there is willing to spend more because they want to feel like they're doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think
and that represents value to their customer.
Yeah, and I think they tie that. So again, coming back to my notes, so just talking through about value to the customer and how customers perceive that value, and making sure that, as you say, that that customers can see that, and then actually Waitrose has got is very keen to make sure that they tie that to a fair price for their farmer. He did a very good job of kind of trying to explain that what a fair price actually is difficult to pin down. And if you talk to different farmers and you talk to farmers in general, their understanding of a fair price and Waitrose's understanding of a fair price is often different. But actually, when he started to drill down into it a little bit, the explanation, it was that they want to work with long-term farming partners, and they need those farming partners to be profitable. So there isn't the incentive necessarily for them to squeeze farmers for everything that they're worth to get the produce, because they want long-term relationships for high quality produce.
And they want investment, and they want engineering support with data alignment and insight, because what a Waitrose customer wants is they want the story. And the more alignment of their data, the better. If they can put on the packet, and a lot came up about labeling and how labeling is messy and busy and and complicated. And I've heard that time and time again over the last 5 years going to conferences. There's a big issue about people that here in the UK, we have a traffic light system for nutritional values. People get that. But on the back, there's still an individualized list of ingredients. There's still where it's been packed, when it was packed. There's loads of information. And the bit that people actually understand is that traffic light on the front. That seems to have worked, or that's what you pick up from the industry, is that from the food sector, is they seem to think that the traffic light has worked. And it's now about how can we give other information to the customer in an equally as successful and accessible way. But that information is only going to come through traceability and knowing where that came from, who grew it, how they grew it, etc. And the Waitrose customer will happily pay more for that, which is great for farmers, because Kieran Walsh, who we'll come on to in a minute, he will always say that the problem is, farmers shouldn't just be giving out their data for nothing. Often they're told, oh, we need your data, and farms give it out. He says he now advises his customers never give out data unless you're being paid for it. Mm-hmm. But by the way that Jake was speaking, is that Waitrose will pay for it potentially, because their customers should or may see value in that story.
Yes, yeah, and I've jumped ahead a little bit through my notes, because actually there's some interesting bits. So we've said the T word again: traceability and transparency. And actually, he put some really nice fine points together in terms of actually what he sees, or certainly in his position, he saw as kind of challenges or problems to set for engineers. So when he was talking about traceability, I just started thinking a little bit around, and he mentioned it as well. So live streams and things like that. So actually having information that can somehow tie through from the product on a shelf, that can tie through to another piece of collateral that actually adds that piece of value. So could you live stream to the farm? So he was talking sort of hypothetically as saying, well, we can have a piece of labeling. You could scan a code or use some element of that labeling to access some digital collateral, which is actually a live stream from a farm, live stream from a field, or some other area,
or even an edited video of that farmer talking about their supply chain.
Yeah,
talking about their system.
Exactly, and he talked around, and actually got me thinking, because I was again around the data piece. There's the beyond some of the data. Whenever we talk about data, and I think we've got a podcast brewing about data, I think.
Sadly.
But when we talk about data, we often think about the insights that we can draw from it. But actually, there is also a marketing value to that, and value add to the customer that perhaps is more kind of, it's almost more kind of obvious to them. They want to see that value piece. And if that value piece is, oh, okay, well, this is actually a few images from the crop that this came from, that's amazing, because I get to actually see what I'm eating. And I think actually there were some interesting challenges there. Moving on fairly quickly, but he was also talking about making metric gathering effortless. So allowing information to be captured on farm and then finding its way up through the supply chain easily.
I mean, that's quite a good thing, because as I say, if you're constantly asking farmers for more and more and more, it's good at least that he has an appreciation that should be effortless on the farmer's behalf. Mm-hmm. And that was a real challenge to engineers. Just something that he said that was not really engineering but quite interesting is he talked about his peer learning. And he said the best thing to ever do is, he goes, if he goes to farms and tries to tell them how to improve their systems, that's never going to happen. They're never going to listen to him. But what he wants to do is highlight his farms with best practice, and then create events where farms go and see that and learn peer-to-peer. And then he followed on with that, talking about how they've now got an authentic, and this comes back to my sort of edited video thing, but not unedited, is they have an authentic Instagram feed. So, and I didn't pick up what the handle was, but basically Waitrose farmers Instagram. And he goes, we don't get farmers to send us in things that we moderate and put on the Instagram. They have directly shared the login to that account with farmers, and farmers go, I'm going to film this and I'm going to upload it to Waitrose Instagram. So he said you get some intriguing videos, upside down, on the angle, dubious sound quality, all of those things. But actually that plays into the authenticity piece, and the people who are following it love that. They love that there's a farmer who is struggling to make a camera work on their phone, because actually, they're probably what they are getting over is the passion for the thing they're good at, which is growing some livestock or some fresh produce. So he said, that's been really powerful. So that is something that there is an engineering solution to somehow get that sort of authentic communication through to the packet on the shelf, isn't there?
Yeah. And as I say, I think and the challenge there could be for engineers to turn data captured on farms into marketing collateral.
Yeah,
I think that is perhaps under appreciated, and it was nice to hear that from Waitrose, and that they actually understand that at quite a deep level. So that was interesting to me, and I actually, it's an underappreciated area of kind of data captured on farms. I think he mentioned quite a few times, going back to traceability very quickly, he mentioned blockchain quite a lot, and I think it was blockchain something I haven't really got that good an understanding of or have had much involvement with, but he kept mentioning it, so I feel like there's an appreciation there that perhaps there's an interesting, and again, blockchain is a solution, not a problem, but I think perhaps there's a perception of Waitrose that blockchain or blockchain-like technologies might be quite useful for their traceability. So it was not. Yeah.
For me, that feels like an inevitability, but it's just how long, who develops it, when it happens. I think it will happen. It's just by who and when. But I think, again, I've heard that time and time again from the sort of food industry. They want that traceability. Blockchain offers secure traceability, doesn't it, all the way through? So
yeah,
without being an expert on it, that's kind of what it's doing. So the next, just to keep pushing through to some degree, trying to give you just a flavour of the things we heard over a day, of course, was Kieran Walsh, agronomist for Grounded Advice. Just to be open and transparent, Kieran was the agronomist on my projects, on the hands-free projects. So I know him quite well, and he's a perfect agronomist to come and speak at an engineering conference, because he does like to push technology. His farm, he's got a good group of farmers who want tech. They're definitely a forward-looking bunch. The guys he looks after, the guys and girls, I should say, that he looks after, and therefore he has quite a few strong, let's say, opinions on technology.
Yeah, I think actually that was quite refreshing. It was refreshing to have some strong opinions and some opinions. Sometimes you can have some discussions like this where no one wants to sort of take any particular side of a discussion, and actually he was very keen to explain that and actually give some details that perhaps some agricultural engineers probably understand quite well, and then others probably don't have such a great appreciation of. So he did a good job of kind of talking through kind of historical yields per hectare and value per hectare, and then some of the innovations that have kind of found their way into agriculture, and then kind of frame that with, since fertilizer, none of the innovations in agriculture have had a massive impact on margins.
Yeah, so essentially he put a graph of yield going back to 1930s on the board, and basically you could see a clear 2 ton to the hectare blip where synthetic fertilizer was first applied. There's been a continual gradual increase since then, till around, I always say, around the year 2000, since when there's been a yield plateau. And I often say, the fact that everything anyone's ever sold you since the year 2000 to farmers has clearly not made any difference, because you're still getting the same yields. And essentially, Kieran was pushing at that same point, saying, look, there's a blip for fertilizers introduction. Everything else is just noise. And the blips up and down on his graph, he said, you can pretty much always align that to a weather event. So the biggest impact on that yield on a yearly basis has been weather, rather than any sort of new technology in that time. And he highlighted the cost of technology per hectare. And the fact that, he said some of his farmers were spending £40 a hectare on data packages.
Yeah.
When you consider their banking software, probably, their financial software, their agronomy software, their farm sort of machinery tracking software, their telemetry software. If you put all of those together in a big calculation, divided by hectare, he said some of his farmers are spending £40 a hectare on just data systems.
Yeah.
And where is the clear £40 plus money coming back into the farm from those systems?
Yeah, I thought that was a very interesting point, and actually, having been involved in the work was involved in at Small Robot Company. There was lots of talk around, and the business model was kind of constructed around a charge per hectare basis, and actually, it was interesting to kind of see that how much each hectare is already kind of shouldering, how much cost it's already shouldering as kind of, and actually that's perhaps a lot higher than I had appreciation of. And again, if there isn't a clear value add to some of that, certainly some of that software, then perhaps there's actually an argument to kind of step away from some of those tools, or to move around different tools and see if even that does have an impact. I think kind of moving on from that a little bit, but on the same theme, he was talking a lot about data pipelines and the kind of fractured, disjointed interoperability of data.
The systems and data on machine are very separate and fragmented from the data systems in office. Was very big. He had an image showing sort of a network of farm things and a big crack down the middle, and the crack basically dividing the field systems from the office systems, and that's where the biggest divide sits.
Yeah,
there's divides within those sections as well, of course, but he gave an example of one of his farms last week had a tractor driver basically sat in a field for 3 hours because they were trying to put on a variable rate application. It took him 3 hours to get the application to work because a software engineer at the machinery manufacturer basically, or a team, I guess, of software engineers at one of the manufacturers had done an update, and they had not considered the implication of that update would mean that every other system that plugs into it wasn't going to play ball anymore.
Yeah.
Now, they were surely doing something that they deemed to be an improvement in their system, but I just think that's a real warning for engineers. Always consider, we always have to consider the outcome of our actions. And now that can be on a big level. That can be, people can aim that at me and say, well, you're developing autonomous systems. What does that mean for the world? And yes, I must think about that. But Kieran just highlighted a point that, someone would have literally clicked update in an office somewhere because it was going to make a graphic appear better or something. And the implication of that was how many tractor drivers sat in how many fields not making systems work.
Yes. Yeah.
So on a daily basis, especially in that world of sort of software where you've got instant power to change a thing remotely around the world, we really do need to consider the implication of an engineering action.
Yeah, and I think it's the sort of second and third order impacts, isn't it, in terms of when you've got a data pipeline that's reliant on information moving potentially through 3 or 4 different kind of providers or service providers at the very least, then yeah, it can start to fall apart really, really quickly. And I think also it's interesting that he said, well, you don't have to sit for too long waiting for it to happen before it becomes cheaper just to, in that example, they were going to do some variable rate seeding. Well, just seed the whole field at a set rate because you're wasting someone's time. That's costing money, and that's going to offset any benefits in the long run of that technology. So I think,
well, and also going back to the earlier point of where it's always very hard to prove where the benefit of those technologies are anyway. We've always struggled to prove that variable rate drilling makes a difference. So it's starting to be a real struggle. If we even do it, why are we bothering?
Mm-hmm.
I think just out of context, 3 hours sat in a field might not sound particularly long to somebody who's not in an ag environment, but here in the UK, in the last month, our drilling season has been plagued with huge downpours of rain and exceptionally small dry weather windows. So weather windows that have been literally 24 hours long. So to have lost 3 of those 24 hours is hugely valuable. Now, something I summed up at the end, I had to give a little talk at the end of and share a discussion. And something I summed up about Kieran's talk was his vision of this sort of cyberpunk agronomist future, as I call it. So Kieran already rides around the countryside on an electric motorbike, so he can basically cover more ground quicker, get to all corners of the field rather than just walk. So he sticks to the tram lines, I believe, but he will burn around a whole field on his electric motorbike. Very green and sustainable of him. So he can see more and make better decisions and get better information for his farmers. But one of the things he was adding to his motorcycle drive was he wants Google Glass or Ray-Ban camera glasses that mean he can look to the sides of his motorbike as he's going through, and it will tell him septoria results, and it will tell him green area, NDVI or green area index or biomass numbers. He said he doesn't want to be. It was all about time, and turnaround time was what he was talking about a lot. It was about, I don't want to be taking an image, sending it off for it to be analysed and sending it back, or even worse than that, I don't want to be bagging up leaves, putting them in the post to a lab to get it back. I want tech that is essentially wearable or at least portable, that I can be walking through the field or riding through the field and harvesting data on my own person. I don't want to. He was even saying he didn't want to fly a drone. Drones were the oracle, the solution to everything a few years ago. But he was saying, I don't want to fly a drone. He works in a lot of places where there's restrictive airspace, so for him, just drones don't work either. And he's like, actually, I don't want the. If a sensor on a drone can tell me information about my crop, why can't a sensor that's built into his glasses or maybe his motorcycle helmet tell him the same things?
Yeah, I think that was interesting. I think when he was talking about Apple glasses or Meta glasses or whatever it might be, I think the thing I took away from that actually was perhaps it was inferred but not said that there's the benefit of a company like Apple or Meta having their own sort of ecosystem of data. So when they choose to deliver a product like that, they have that ability to say everything goes through this product, so all the formats are all correct, and then we can start to infer some really powerful things. And I think, as you said, is sort of that utopian vision of him being able to say, right, okay, well, I'm using this piece of technology and it's just going to gather everything I need and feed it back through. And I think that should be held up as an aim. I think there's a number of solutions kind of to that, kind of going, I suppose, probably putting a bit of a finer point on it. And Kieran gave some good fine points. Actually, I was quite pleased. He didn't necessarily say every last problem that he had, but he said any tools that he's got to be cost effective, small and portable, lightweight, easy to maintain and cross platform. But I think there's a couple of solutions to the sort of the data problem. The data problem that seems to be coming around again and again. And one of them is there needs to be more communication between the kind of ag data ecosystem and more willingness to share information. As Kieran put it, everyone's paddling their own canoe, and we need to kind of get to a point where they aren't. And I think failing that, I think there needs to be sort of the application of tools and technologies to actually facilitate data becoming more homogenized, be that pushing it through some sort of, I kind of thought along the line of some sort of AI model that's able to analyze a piece of data, understand what that data is, and then figure out how it can layer up or add that data together. So I think there's two ways in which that could happen. It might be that actually everyone gets their kind of heads together early and it's more of a collaboration agreement, or it may be that there's almost more software in the system to actually facilitate sort of third-party analysis to kind of do that, be it on a platform level or on a sort of a back-end processing level. So I thought that was interesting. And then my final thought again around data was I kind of liked that Kieran had a strong view about data ownership, because I think this is something that I've kind of talked about quite a lot, is farmers, if farmers are the people picking up the bill for gathering the data, then it should belong to them. And actually, a lot of people have access to data that perhaps shouldn't have, or that should have a bit more say or control over that. And Kieran actually taking that to the next level, as you've mentioned, of saying, well, if you're a farmer and someone asks you for a piece of data, you should be paid for that piece of data if you're the one that's paid to capture it in the first place. And I think often farmers end up kind of missing out because they pay to capture the data, they pay to access the data, and then they give that data away for free. And I think
because someone in the supply chain says, "Oh, we need some evidence of this," and they go, "Oh, okay, here's
yeah,
oh, I'll give you the evidence," and the argument will be, "Well, you need to give that to have access to market." Yeah, then that's just becoming an extra burden on the farm when they are farmers' bottom line. So yeah, Kieran's very clear.
Yeah,
he thinks should be paid for it. Interesting. Jumping through to a discussion panel we had at the end, Yalti sort of actually quoted brought up saying, you know, something that came to mind listening to further speakers was that there is a code of practice for farm data use.
Mm-hmm.
That was developed in Brussels. It led the way to compared to a lot of other industries. He was saying other industries have sort of followed suit, but ag were there first because it was such a contentious issue. And he said basically how within that, and we need to look it up, Ray, because I wasn't aware of it, and I probably feel that I now need to go and upskill by finding out about this. But basically, he was saying, you know, within that code of practice, farms own the data, and manufacturers all signed up to that. So, if manufacturers are asking you for substantial sums of money to access data, maybe throw their own code of practice back at them.
Yeah. Or, I mean, I always thought that it would be fair to charge farmers for data if you've put a piece of tech on their machinery for free, some piece of sensing equipment, you've put it on there anyway. You, as a manufacturer, have picked up the price. You haven't added on, oh, would you like X monitoring for your, you know, whatever value it might be. If you're basically, as a manufacturer, you're picking up that bill, I think you kind of have a right to say to the farmer, we can switch this feature on. You haven't paid anything, but we can switch it on and you can access the data. But I think if you're putting yourself, and obviously we need to read the code of conduct, so this might actually come up within that. But I think it should be very much on the basis of who's actually paid to capture the data. But I think probably we need to wrap our heads around that code of conduct.
Yeah, I'm just going to argue back though, because I just think that ultimately nothing was put on your machine for free. If I've paid £1 million for my combine, I want yield maps, I want protein maps, and I don't want to pay anything extra for it. If I sit in a farmer's shoes, I've paid £1 million quid. You can say, oh, we put it on there for nothing, and you just have to pay to access it. But no, you haven't. You haven't put it on there for nothing. I paid you £1 million. Give me access to what I own.
Yeah.
You are listening to Brash Ag, supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust.
Let's move on. So we've got Claire Morgan-Davis from livestock scientist from SRUC, so Shruck, up in Scotland, Scottish Rural University. And she gave a talk very much on sheep, which is her preferred area of interest. But, you know, as she said in her own way, there's lots of crossovers. Sheep are interesting in the sense that, from her point of view, they are grown in marginal places, uplands, harsh environments. They are a way of monetizing harsh environments, was kind of where she was getting at first. However, those harsh environments clearly give us some issues as engineers.
Yes. Yeah. I think, I noticed some of those down. So again, going back through my notes, harsh environments that are very remote, with very poor weather, poor connectivity, and again that kind of sets the scene for any solutions that you know, sort of even low tech solutions, to be honest, kind of are still subject to those challenges of weather, remoteness. Getting hardware into a field starts to become a challenge. If it's on the side of a mountain.
Yeah, well, it's just that thing of where's that technology developed? It's probably developed in a metropolitan city, or to be fair, Yeltsin highlighted the fact that many ag manufacturers are actually based in provincial towns, and he's quite proud of that. So there are, but the people sat there are remote from these very harsh environments the technology might end up being used in, and to always bear that in mind.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that was said was about energy use, and how, you know, a lot of the time IoT people go, oh, we'll just put a solar panel on it, or go and put a solar panel on something that's up on a Scottish hillside, and there's certain times of the year where it won't be harvesting much energy.
Yeah, and I think actually it was interesting, kind of pulling back to the sort of IoT side of things, and it was interesting. They'd done some research, and they'd sort of spoken to just over 1,000 people in sort of in this situation where they're marginal farming sheep, and there was 62% of those people came back and said they don't use any technology on their farm, which I think was quite interesting. And then it dropped off very, very quickly as to diminishing proportions of people that actually what other technologies they did use, like EID and sort of weight scales, digital weight scales, things like that, pregnancy scanning, all of those things, very low uptake there. And I think that is linked back to those challenges of how you actually deploy those things in remote areas. But I think there was also got tied forward in terms of kind of she sort of mentioned demystifying technology to farmers and actually creating kind of collaboration between farmers to allow them to kind of share technology between themselves. Because she sort of said, I can sit here and say, you need to adopt this, you need to adopt that, until I'm blue in the face. But
Comes to that,
it has to come from someone who's got experience in actually deploying it on their farm and having that.
It's that peer-to-peer piece that was mentioned by Gaten.
Exactly.
And it's quite interesting. We've got the peer-to-peer, learning, but also I think there's ultimately, I mean, you can't avoid the fact that there's a financial difference here as well. If you're talking about a sheep, and a sheep's worth 150 quid,
Mm-hmm.
If the sensor to know where that sheep is costs £100, there's not many people that are going to do that, even if it was a rugged thing. So we have to think of affordability, and it comes back to what is affordability again. What affordability to you or I might be different to a sheep farmer in Scotland. The other thing that was mentioned I found interesting was the seasonal labour thing, something I don't really think of, but you know, clearly times of the year sheep farming in highland environments is literally you turf your sheep out and you don't really see them much. You have hardy breeds of sheep that you kind of assume get on with it, and you do your best to go and check on them, but you're never going to probably get around all the sheep on a daily basis for sure. So it's quite a light touch for big periods of the year, but then in other periods of the year it's obviously intense. You bring these sheep in, you have to work with them in a yard, lambing, etc. But you're also not going to want to do that very often. So again, it linked back to Kieran's point of time of turnaround. She goes, if you bring all your sheep in, you run them all through the weigh scales, you take samples for them, and then a week later you get those results back, and then you have to get all your sheep back in again to pull out the ones that have got issues or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That's a big job. So that time of turning data into insight, I think, linked from her to Kieran, despite their different worlds.
Yes. Yeah, no, I think I kind of picked up on that as well. I mean, data was the common theme. I don't think there was a single person that stood up and didn't mention it. So that was a common theme. I think you're right. I think there are challenges around gathering data, but doing so in an economical way for the thing you're trying to gather data from. So in sheep production with very, very thin margins, you can't justify £1,000 worth of equipment for each sheep. It's just not gonna stack up. So I think there was that, and then I think she started to sort of put some fine points on it around what can engineers provide, or benchmarking, weather warnings, time saving, and then things have to be cost effective, applied across the whole flock. So not just sort of single data points across, a couple of animals, because it's really expensive to deploy. It needs to be across the whole flock. And then, real time or download, and that piece that you're talking about around, do I have to go back to an office that might be, 50 miles away or whatever, however far away it is from the place where you're actually doing the work, to go and infer some information and then come back and actually action that, or can you have a real time capability?
Yeah, I'm just going to come back to my point. Always nice and simple. Data to insight. It's insight that farmers want.
Yeah,
it's not data that farmers want. And if that if that happens quickly and efficiently, you're going to add value to the farm. If you've got to fight for it, if it's hard work, if things don't talk to each other, it's not going to add value. It's just the margins aren't there.
Yeah,
in most situations.
Yeah.
All right. Our very last speaker then was James Price, an Oxfordshire farmer, so in the south of the UK, farming across land that is both owned and rented, on Cotswold Brash. Quite apt for our podcast. Of course, if in episode 1 we explained roughly what Cotswold Brash is, so very, very shallow soils, which are full of stone, basically. They're not bad soils, there's just lots of rock and they're not very deep. So he's farming there, and he went through, his, I am a farmer, these are my problems.
Yeah,
quite,
it was interesting. I mean, it was good, actually, because he gave lots of screenshots and examples of software and kind of, photos from his farm, and it was actually really good to see kind of they'd done some, digging down through the soil profile to actually see what the soil looks like. And as he described it, someone said it looked like he was trying to farm the pavement in places where there was a very thin, as you said, very thin amount of soil, and then basically bedrock. But actually, the context came from talking through some of the tools and system, the software that they're using on the farm. And actually, I would say it's the software that Kieran's talking about, in terms of per hectare charges and things like that. So, it was really interesting to see, to kind of see that, because as an engineer, I haven't actually spent much time looking at that kind of end of things. So it was interesting to see that, and actually an understanding about, again, data and how they're kind of capturing information on farm and where that's getting pulled through to. And then he did give some context around how much that costs. So he was talking about how different tractor providers and software platforms, kind of, some of them are free, some of them you've got to pay extra for certain things, some of them, like telematics, costs, I don't know, he said between £5 and £15 a month. But then he was saying the John Deere platform will allow you to connect to other tractors, but then it
only limited capability.
And I think that, for me, that really started to round off that whole connectivity and data kind of transferability piece. And then, talking around, it was interesting, actually, just a kind of a use case they had around drones as well. So they were using them they were in a limited airspace area as well. So I think he acknowledged the limitation sometimes of drones, but he was also talking about some of the simple things you can do with a drone, like finding broken drains. So finding a wet spot in a field, and then at the right time of year, you can see within the crop where the drains go to and from, and then you can find the areas in the field where there's been a damage to that drain. So they actually used that. That was insights gathered from data that was all processed through themselves. It wasn't
the human processor,
human eyeball, and then but actually adding value, which I thought was interesting for him to mention.
I mean, there's something I can completely concur with. We had that on Hands-Free Farm, where we had a field with some horrendous wet spots that we ended up getting stuck in and all sorts of things at times. But it was very clear where they were. And if we had the budget or time or capability to fix the drains. We knew where the problems were. We had lots of data to tell us where our problem drains were. Just to pick up on one of the ones he said, in terms of value, Ray, you mentioned about he said that Class want £800 a year for telematics on his combine.
Yes.
So he's got a combine that's worth, or new was worth. One of them was quite old. I think one of them I recognised from back in the days when I used to drive combines. So one of them was a good, 15 years old probably. But still, they're hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of machinery, and that telematics is off limits to them without an extra cost, and not an insignificant one.
Yeah. And I think, again, that comes back to kind of Kieran's point around data and who's paying for what, and who's picking up the bill, and who's actually having the biggest wins out of that. I think, I think it's interesting to hear that from a farmer's perspective as well.
Yeah. So moving away from data, something else he talked about was sort of security of technology.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that GPS equipment is regularly stolen from agricultural vehicles. Thousands of pounds worth of equipment is literally just sat on top of a cab of a tractor sometimes. And he actually highlighted the safety issue. He's got tractor drivers that every evening have to climb up on their cab to take off the equipment to basically take it home with them so it doesn't get stolen.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, if they leave it up there, that's potentially thousands of pounds worth of kit that's going to get stolen. But this is suddenly a lone working issue where you've got people in fields or on remote farmyards, doing dodgy things late at night after a day's work where they're probably fatigued. So I thought it was a really heartfelt cry for help almost. The fact that, come on, engineers, make it better. Why is this even? How can someone steal a thing off the cab of my tractor? Why isn't it just completely integrated, bolted on, secure? Shouldn't be an issue.
The image that he gave was actually quite telling, wasn't it? I mean, it was a picture of obviously an aftermarket piece of very simple piece of hardware, which basically effectively strapped a GPS to a roof, and then you put a padlock for it. And I looked at that and I thought, well, the challenge for an engineer there is to basically make it that if you steal that unit, it's completely useless to anyone else, and you don't need to lock it onto the roof anymore.
Which is,
from a software perspective, it either shuts itself down or becomes completely inert. And I think that is I mean, this is where he gave some really good fine points. He was talking about he loves new technology, but it can't hold them back. And he was talking about AdBlue. So AdBlue provides a lot of problems on farm, and actually that links through to some safety issues. I mean, he gave the example of a sprayer basically coming to a complete halt on a dual carriageway because of an AdBlue fault in the engine. So for the safety of the environment, that maybe there's some slight emissions might be going out the exhaust pipe for the next 5 minutes. Instead, it just basically locked up the tractor in the middle of the road. Was his description. Yeah, and he said that, and actually I think that's an interesting perspective for engineers. You sort of talk at an ethical level, and I think actually there is an interesting kind of philosophical piece there around what's the what responsibilities do you have? Is it to the person in the cab or everyone else outside the cab, or where do you draw those lines? And actually, I think he made a good point there.
It's almost on the lines of trolleyology. This trolleyology,
trolleyology.
You pull the lever and you kill 2 nuns, or do you pull the lever and kill 10 children?
I see. Yeah.
That stuff. So it's almost on those lines. I think it's a fairly obvious outcome from this trolleyology. You shouldn't be basically locking the wheels up on a machine because there's a slight AdBlue fault. I mean, that's just mad. And again, it comes to that. As engineers, we need to be thinking about the implications of our actions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I think so. And also, he put in a desperate cry for toolboxes on tractors.
Big cry for toolboxes on tractors. And I just wanted to round off. I think, Ray, we need to be going from our location. We are sat outside the conference room. We've been in all day, and we believe we're about to be shooed from the door. Yeah. So we're going to wrap this up, I think. We can't not. I just want to give a shout out to some mechanical technologies that were mentioned. Kieran mentioned lightweight drills. Actually, we forgot to say that earlier. Why is every drill getting heavier and heavier that requires more and more horsepower? You've got hundreds of horsepower pulling 6 meter drills. 50 horsepower per meter sort of numbers. These are crazy numbers, something I passionately disbelieve in. Hands-free hectare, case in point, we had a 2-meter drill being pulled by a 40 horsepower tractor. There's no reason that 20 horsepower a meter should be enough, but generally the drills are so blooming heavy, you can't actually, get away with any less than hundreds of horsepower. So a cry from Kieran there. And he did also offer a solution, a horse drill that's come to market, which is a lot more lightweight, a really lightweight frame, a front-mounted hopper for seed. And he just said, basically this allows the farmer who's just invested in this can now go in a wide range of conditions, because he's gone for that smaller, lighter option. Yeah. Something that plays into my my world completely. So I'm glad to hear that from Kieran. And James also mentioned direct injection systems on sprayers to cut down on chemical use, and also see and spray technology, spot spraying technology. We've obviously done a whole episode on that. It was our first technical episode. It was all about see and spray technology. But there is a farmer asking for it. The fact that he knows that if we can get to green on green and we can drop our chemical use by 95%, that's a win for everyone. It is a massive priority being looked at, but it needs to continue to be so.
Yeah. He called green on green detection the holy grail, which I think it gets referred to quite a lot. But yeah, it was good. Again, I think you need to hear these things from the horse's mouth from farmers.
Well, it's nice that it's not again, coming back to our favourite phrase, it's not a solution looking for a problem. This is a farmer saying, this is something I want.
Yeah.
Okay. I think we're about to get kicked out, so we're probably going to wrap it up. I don't know if there's anything. You said you had a few themes, so let's just put out your themes of the day. And yeah,
I've got 3, I suppose. 2 we've already talked about. So traceability, and labeling, yeah, and how the challenges for engineers to pull that through, all the way along the supply chain. And some of that not just being traceability from a sort of a technical or kind of regulatory perspective, but also potentially from a marketing perspective and value add up through the supply chain. So that was one for me. The other one was data interoperability. So much talk about that. So many people passionate about that because they are the ones sat trying to figure these things out. It's costing time. It's costing money. There's either a regulatory or a technological solution or a blend of the two. That's my opinion, but also from the sort of discussions that have been had today. And then the final one actually was a bit of a bit of an outside one, but a lot of people talking about the Jeremy Clarkson effect.
It came up a few times,
and actually how that's had a good impact. How so Clarkson's farm has had actually a good impact in terms of consumer awareness of farming, and actually how that has helped. Again, with companies like Waitrose positioning themselves as high quality kind of suppliers.
I just want to, and bring into that, not the Clarkson effect at all, but just Yalti made a good point that from his view, as a European based in Brussels, is that the UK seems to have the greatest disconnect to farmers. It's not exactly the words he used, but he said the sort of appreciation of farmers in European countries seems to be far greater than here in the UK, which is just something interesting to hear, because I would have kind of assumed it was a fairly, just a syndrome of the modern world that people don't understand farming. But he seemed to make out that certainly we're worse off than those across the channel, which is sad but interesting.
Yes, yeah, that was an interesting take, and actually, again, perhaps the Clarkson effect can have a positive impact there and drive a bit more appreciation for farmers in the UK from the consumer.
I mean, I did actually have a conversation about that at lunch as well, where people saying you go into a shop in France and you get, you're instantly faced with beautiful fresh produce, even on the side of the road, like local, a service station. Whereas here in the UK, you go through the door of a service station and you see a fairly dry looking packet sandwich, or maybe a pie. But nothing wrong with pies, my favourite food item. Okay, I think that'll do, Ray. We will call it a day, and
super quick one. We've now got the email address, so it's contact@brash-ag.com. So if you've got any questions or comments, send us an email.
Yeah, it might be nice to do, if we get enough questions, it might be nice to almost do a question time episode, But also any feedback is also gratefully received. And of course, that will be in the show notes.
Yeah, show notes, definitely.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Raymond King and Kit Franklin. Brash Ag. Supported by the Douglas Bomford Trust. Thank you, and tune in next time.